Hey everyone, it's Ivan with KitBadger.com, out here for another gear review, and today talking stoves. This one right here, Twig Stove. This being the Stoker by Uberleben. You're saying to yourself, Ivan, that does not look like a stove. Not yet, I promise it is. I'm gonna set it up right here in a moment on this nice piece of bark, so I don't have to have it balanced in the snow. But pretty cool. It actually comes in this wax canvas bag, which you can use if you're going to forge stuff, because again, twig stove. And there's actually some space in there beyond just the room for the stove. Oftentimes, I guess we'll back up a second. This is the second of the Stoker stoves I've got from Uberleben. And pretty cool company, north of me up in, I want to say Bonner's Ferry, up in the tip of Idaho. And I had another one of these. This is the newer generation. The last one had worked great, and kind of same thing as far as, well, similar. Same thing as far as wax canvas bag, which was pretty handy, because what I would usually end up doing also is I would shove a bunch of like birch bark and stuff in there, because you need to get this thing started. It's a twig stove. But there is space for that in this canvas bag. So here's all the pieces. I will show it going together. One of the improvements over the old one is this right here, which is pretty awesome grill top. The whole thing is, I want to say, made out of 303 stainless. Could have a wrong number, but right here is your base. And then you have 3 of your sides that look identical like that. And then you have the front of your stove right there. And so the way this goes together, so you'll take a couple of these guys, basically put them in like that, slide them up. Same thing with the other piece. And now's where it gets tricky. These tabs go in respectively, these 3 pieces. And then this guy right here. One side drops down, and the other side, oh, without losing our tab, or the bottom part. Bam, I did it. Of course, this is not the most stable piece of bark, but it's the one I have. And then this right here drops on top, and bam, we have our stove. And so I do not recommend trying to light your fire with this on top. So I'll show you how I start a fire inside here and get this going. Quick aside before I get going, these are arguably some of the worst conditions to use a twig stove. Last night or yesterday it snowed or rained depending on elevation, and now it's not warm, but it's definitely not 32 degrees. So things have melted and everything's a little bit damp. But good news, everything can burn. Just means basically it has to evaporate the water first before it can burn. So I did break some pretty dry pieces I found. And then I have some other questionable pieces, but we'll get going with this thing and how I usually start the fire in it. Eventually, we're going to be basically feeding all of our wood through this, and we're going to have a grate over the top. So I usually will like to start with some pieces fed in this way, and kind of questionable wood, but basically feed some pieces in like this, and then I will, let me break this other one some, but I'll basically, let me try another piece. I'll end up kind of making a little ledge of sorts in the back here. And really this is just to hold my little baby fire as I get this thing going, just so everything doesn't kind of fall off down to the back. And so I will use bigger pieces to do this, to build this kind of, like I said, almost like a little fire platform. And this is probably plenty now. And so now we come to the part where I will say this does not lend itself to using like flint and steel, ferro rod, something like that, because how do you get it started in here? So you can either start a little tiny fire, hopefully you have some sort of gloves that you can then drop your little fire that you started in here, or what I like to use, I will show you now. If you ever saw my To Build a Fire series, a big thing with starting fires is just having a flame that sticks around so you can work with it. So what I like to do, one, this lotion's amazing. You can get it through locks. It's incredible. But when the lotion's all gone, I basically use it for fire starters. And so these right here are by Blackbeard, little fire plugs. They work amazing even when they're totally wet, doesn't matter. And you can light them with a flame or with a spark. And so there's a couple different ways to actually light these, whether you just light an end or fluff the entire thing, light it, burn from the middle basically. Or what I'll usually do is light them from the middle in two halves. So work it like that. Expose kind of that fluffy core. And then this will take a spark. It'll take pretty much anything. Something I'm actually playing with right now is their little plasma fire starter, or lighter, I guess. Just, that's it. There we go. And then I'll set that right in there. Now this is going to give me some time, which is super important, especially because most of the stuff I have, I would not call super dry, even though I looked for the driest stuff I could find. So I will initially not worry at all about feeding stuff in through the front. Doesn't really matter. What we need right now is to just get this started, which in part means just drying this stuff out so that it will burn. And so right now I'm just going to work on getting this fire started with the top completely open, feeding things in from the top. Yes, I did end up using another fire plug because beyond just lighting the stove to be like, hey, this is how it works, I actually have to get this stove lit so that I can melt some snow for water so I don't dehydrate. Once we get to the point where we've burned down most of the stuff, again, everything will burn once it gets rid of the water. So we're almost there to where we can start putting sticks in. Well, we can start putting sticks in through the front right now. We can't put our grate on yet. So I'm going to continue to feed this thing, keep it alive. And now that I'm getting a nice little coal bed there also, I'll start feeding in some of my not as dry stuff, as well as the dry stuff, because I have more of one than the other. And once this gets burnt down, well, I guess, shoot, just about there. All right, so basically once nothing's sticking up too bad, get rid of that guy, take our grate and we just put it over the top. And there we go. And now we can do whatever we're going to do on the stove. As I mentioned, I'm going to start melting snow in a second. It's also a grate. I have most certainly just straight grilled things on it, which is actually pretty cool. You don't have a ton of control over the temperature, so more often than not, it's probably going to be a little hotter than you would want to grill something, unless you're just working off some coals. But even then, because of how big the firebox is, one, you're not going to just walk away for 20 minutes. It will go out. You need to actually feed it. And the other part is, I guess with it going out, if you have a coal bed, it won't stay a coal bed for that long because of how small it is. but it's also that small, and it packs that small, that flat too. So right now I'm gonna keep this thing going and start melting some snow. Well, these sticks I started with are really long. I usually do that. They will burn down, and you just basically keep feeding them in. And then same with whatever else you want to put in. Doesn't matter if it sticks out. Just keep feeding it in as it starts burning down. Sometimes you need to help it along, especially with damp wood. As I mentioned, these pieces will just fall down. You just feed them back in. Fortunately, because of that nice little coal bed in there, it is relatively forgiving. If you walk away to go forage more wood, be able to come back, throw some stuff in there, again, depending on how damp it is, blow on it for a second and get it going again. I really like the original stove. This one I like even more. Definite improvements. One, the original, there's basically some pretty thin pieces of cross metal, and they didn't do as good of a job stabilizing whatever you put on it. And then you also couldn't just grill on it, which, like I said, I've definitely grilled stuff on this. And yeah, the other big improvement I would say is the airflow. The original one, there was nowhere near as much airflow, which makes a significant difference. And the ability to get a fire going in these, wood permitting, i.e. how wet it is actually really easy to include even when it's pretty windy. And there's plenty of airflow, but not so much that it's putting out your fire, if that makes sense. If anything, it might burn a little bit hotter and faster than it would otherwise, but it continues to just burn. And being able to have a twig stove is really nice. Weight-wise, I think 18, 20 ounces, something like that. Is that heavy? Yeah, it's heavy compared to like a pocket rocket and a fuel canister, but when the fuel canister's done, you're done, and you will never have to buy fuel for this, like twigs, which is really cool. And so as long as you have a reliable method of starting a fire, like ignition, this is good to go. As I showed you, it'll even, again, depending on what you have, those little plugs are great. There'll be links to all this stuff down below too, but stuff like that, you can, if you need to, use more than one. I use two, come to find out. And yeah, it'll basically dry out whatever you have, get that thing going, get yourself a good little coal bed, and then you can start feeding damp stuff in there and it'll just burn it. Yeah, I have and continue to, one, if I bring it out of the mountains, like I said, only stove I brought out here, I have to melt some snow for water, but I will, if I'm not actually using it out here, basically lives in my car. Now, am I gonna need a stove? I don't know, maybe. And it's one of those where nothing can go wrong with it. It's literally 5 panels. You put it together and you can find twigs anywhere. Like even in the desert, you can find dry twigs to burn to get this thing going. So being able to have a stove that does not require any fuel, can be used wherever, I think that is really cool. One thing of note with respect to starting fires, keeping fire, well, not really keeping fires going, but You can use these in really cold weather where your fuel canisters, they kind of stop working. Like once you get down into like teens or even below that, wood will always burn. It's just if your wood is 13 degrees, it needs to get up to the point where it's going to combust for it to combust and it'll burn. Just something to be aware of. If you're looking for a pretty cool twig stove, I would encourage you to check it out. They come in, obviously, just the stainless. It's 304 stainless steel, I guess, food grade. And they also have one that is black and one kind of a smoky blue color. I want to say those are both Cerakoted, like high temp ceramic coating. But overall, pretty rad. Price-wise, you get them directly through Uberleben. There'll be links down below. I want to say a little under 80 bucks. Is that expensive? I don't know. You will never buy fuel for it and you'll have it for the rest of your life. So not that bad of a deal actually if you're going to use it. And yeah, I've been pleased with it. But if you're interested, go check it out. And as always, thanks for joining us at kitbadger.com. Look forward to seeing you next time.